In 2004, a 16-year-old girl vanished without a trace during her town's annual 4th of July parade. Police suggested she may have simply run away, overwhelmed by the chaos of adolescence. But no note, no footprints, no witnesses, nothing supported that theory. For 2 long years, her family was left with only silence. Then, a hiker stumbled upon a weather-beaten camera deep in the woods, its Lyle miraculously preserved. When developed, the photographs revealed something chilling: her final moments, and someone else standing just behind her. The morning sun rose heavy and hot, pressing down on the small town like a slow-moving tide. It was July 4th, and the streets had been dressed in red, white, and blue. Flags fluttered lazily in the heat, bunting draped over wooden railings, and the air smelled of fried dough and sweet lemonade. Brass instruments blared from the high school marching band, their notes bouncing between brick storefronts. Families lined the sidewalks, children waving sparklers, though it was still daylight. It was the kind of day that seemed impossible to fracture, a day built on routine, tradition, and joy. But before it was over, a girl would vanish. 16-year-old Marissa Thompson had braided ribbons into her hair that morning, red and white strips woven carefully by her younger sister, Ellie. Their mother had stood at the kitchen sink, hands wet with dishwater, watching the girls through the window as the sound of distant firecrackers rattled the glass. "You look beautiful," she'd called, her voice half drowned by the television news announcing the parade route. Marissa had only smiled, tugging her denim jacket tighter though the heat already pressed sweat to her skin. "It's too hot for this," she had muttered, and her father, already lacing his boots by the door, laughed. "You'll think it when the sun sets. Nights get chilly." It was the kind of ordinary family exchange no one notices while it's happening. Later, they would replay it endlessly in their minds, scouring every word, searching for some buried meaning. By noon, the parade was alive. Drumbeats shook the pavement. Horses clopped rhythmically past the crowd. Candy was flung from floats, scattering across the asphalt where children dove greedily. Somewhere near the corner by Maple Street, Marissa's friends waved her over. She left her family with a shrug, promising she'd be back before the fireworks. Her mother remembered the feel of her daughter's hand slipping away, the warmth of it gone too fast. The crowd swelled, bands marched, fire trucks screamed, confetti spiraled in the humid air. Marissa moved easily through the laughter and music, just another teenager blending into the restless current of people. Her friends recalled her laughing, snapping photographs with a cheap disposable camera, the kind you wind with a stubborn click. For a while, she was there, vivid, real, undeniable. And then, in an instant, she wasn't. Later testimony described it as though the earth had swallowed her whole. One minute she was near the hot dog stand, hair ribbons bright against the blur of bodies. The next, she was gone. No scream, no struggle, just absence. Maybe she went with another group, one friend had offered when questioned. She said she'd be right back. Another insisted, shaking their head, tears stinging their eyes. Her parents scoured the street in disbelief, voices raw from calling her name. Ellie sobbed as the crowd thinned, fireworks preparation beginning, while her father shoved through strangers, demanding if anyone had seen his daughter. The police, slow to take the alarm seriously, suggested she'd slipped away willingly. But her mother knew better. She remembered the warmth of that hand, the casual promise to return. She remembered the moment it was broken. As the last float rolled past and the brass faded into distance, the street lay strewn with paper cups, discarded candy wrappers, and silence. Neighbors drifted home. Families gathered for picnics. The air cooled as evening crept in, but one family stood motionless, still searching faces that were no longer there. And from that instant forward, she was never seen alive again. The moment the parade ended, panic set in. Families drifted home, carrying folded lawn chairs and half-empty soda cups, but one family remained rooted in place, their faces pale, their voices rising above the thinning crowd. Marissa was not just separated by a few blocks or hidden in the tangle of neighbors, truly gone. Her mother clutched her youngest daughter's hand so tightly that Ellie cried out, yet she didn't let go. Her father stormed through the dwindling audience, shouting Marissa's name with a voice that cracked under the weight of fear. The air, once vibrant with laughter and music, had turned unsettlingly hollow. Confetti still stuck to the damp pavement, crunching beneath hurried footsteps. A half-deflated balloon drifted lazily across the street, caught in the sticky July heat. Marissa's friends lingered near the hot dog stand, their faces blotched red from both the sun and their guilt. "She was just here," one whispered. "She said she'd be back." "Maybe she's at the park," another offered, though the tremor in her voice betrayed the truth she didn't believe it. The Thompson family searched everywhere, behind the floats, through the alleys, lined with dumpsters, even inside the school gym where the band had stowed its instruments. They called her name until their throats ached. Strangers joined briefly, offering sympathetic shrugs before slipping back to their own families. By mid-afternoon, when Marissa still hadn't surfaced, her father pushed through the doors of the local police station. The air inside was stale, humming with the slow drone of a box fan. A pair of officers leaned back in squeaking chairs, lukewarm coffee cooling on their desks. When he burst in, frantic, they exchanged a look that was more annoyance than alarm. "She's probably with friends," one officer said, his voice casual, almost bored. "You don't understand," Marissa's father snapped, fists slamming against the counter. "She's 16. She wouldn't just vanish. She promised she'd be back." The officer sighed, scribbling on a notepad with deliberate slowness. "Teenagers run off all the time. Give it a few hours. She'll come home when she's ready." It was the first cut in a wound that would never truly heal, the suggestion that their daughter had simply chosen to disappear. Back on the streets, word spread quickly. Eyewitness accounts trickled in, each one different, each one contradicting the last. A vendor swore he saw her buying lemonade minutes before the parade ended. A boy from school claimed she'd been near the library, though he admitted he hadn't looked closely. Another woman insisted she'd seen Marissa laughing with friends near the park entrance, but those same friends denied it. "She never left us," one insisted. "She was right there, then gone," another muttered, staring down at the pavement, as though the asphalt itself held answers. Every detail seemed to dissolve under scrutiny. No one could agree on the last moment she was truly visible. It was as though she had slipped through the cracks of reality. By early evening, desperation boiled into anger. Marissa's mother pressed her palms together in silent prayer outside the police station, whispering through tears. Her father stood beside her, voice shaking as he confronted the officers again. "You're wasting time," he said. "She's not a runaway. She's my daughter, and she's out there." Still, the response was maddeningly calm. "We'll put out an alert," an officer finally conceded, but his tone carried no urgency, no recognition of the family's terror. To the Thompsons, it felt like being dismissed, abandoned in the very moment they needed protection most. As night approached, the streets emptied completely. Fireworks stands lit their first sparklers crackling against the horizon, their sharp scent of sulfur stinging the air. Searchers carried flashlights now, beams cutting across playground swings and through patches of tall grass. Each flicker of light raised hope that quickly collapsed back into despair. The sun sagged toward the tree line, painting the sky in streaks of bruised purple and orange. The Thompson family remained out there, calling, pleading, combing every corner of their small town until their bodies trembled from exhaustion. But the hours bled together with no trace, no answers, no Marissa, and as the final streaks of daylight vanished into night, so too did their hope for that day. Yet as the sun set, not a single clue had surfaced. Rumors spread faster than grief. By dawn the next morning, whispers slithered through the small town like smoke. She must have run away. To the police, it was the simplest explanation. To neighbors, it was the easiest to believe. A teenage girl disappearing in broad daylight, that was too terrifying to accept. A runaway, however, was manageable. Inside the Thompson home, the theory landed like a blade. Marissa's mother sat at the kitchen table, her hands clasped around a mug gone cold hours ago. Her husband paced the floorboards, steps heavy, jaw tight. The wallpaper, once cheerful with faded florals, seemed to close in around them. "She wouldn't just leave," her mother whispered. "Not without telling me. Not without telling anyone." Ellie sat silently nearby, clutching the ribbon she had woven into her sister's hair the day before. The fabric was frayed now, torn loose in her small hands. The police visited that morning, their uniforms neat, their voices rehearsed. One officer leaned against the doorframe, notebook in hand. "She's 16, he said, almost apologetic. "That's old enough to want out. Maybe she was overwhelmed. Maybe she needed space." Her father's eyes burned. She needed space? She left her purse, her phone, her shoes she wears every day. What kind of runaway leaves without anything? The officer didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence spoke louder than words. To fight back, the Thompsons pulled out pieces of Marissa's life. Tangible proof that she wasn't a runaway. College brochures, still stacked on her desk. Open notebooks filled with careful handwriting. A half-written essay on her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. Her best friend recounted the sleepover plans they'd made for the following weekend. Teachers described her as diligent, dependable. She was excited, her friend said tearfully in an interview. She talked about fireworks, about summer. You don't make plans if you're running away. But the contradictions only deepened. Some classmates muttered about her being quiet lately, distant. A store clerk thought she looked distracted at the lemonade stand. One woman swore she'd overheard Marissa arguing with someone near the end of the parade, though no one else remembered seeing it. The runaway theory began to fray under the weight of too many holes. Still, the police clung to it, reluctant to admit something darker might be at play. At night, the house echoed with silence. Ellie's voice broke through at once, a whisper from the doorway to her parents' room. "Mom, if she ran away, why didn't she take me with her?" Her mother's heart split at the words. She gathered her youngest in her arms, the two of them trembling together beneath the dim light of the hallway. The shadows of doubt thickened. Each conversation with police felt more dismissive, each day stretched thinner with exhaustion. The family's insistence only made them seem more desperate, more irrational in the eyes of those who wanted an easy explanation. But inside the Thompson home, certainty remained unshaken. Marissa had not left of her own free will. Something else had happened, something no one wanted to face. And in that denial, the hours slipped further away, carrying her with them. If she had run away, why had she left everything behind? The second day of searching dawned heavy with heat and dread. The small town streets, once alive with patriotic songs and laughter, were now lined with posters bearing Marissa's face. Her school photo, laminated and grainy, fluttered from telephone poles in the July wind. Neighbors stapled copies to fences. Volunteers taped them to shop windows, yet each paper square seemed fragile against the enormity of her absence. When no trace appeared in town, the search spilled outward into the trees that bordered the community, into the places where shadows clung. The woods, dense and unmapped to most locals, suddenly became the stage on which every nightmare might unfold. Police cars lined the dirt access road. Their sirens were silent now, replaced by the bark of search dogs straining at their leashes. Volunteers gathered, faces slick with sweat, their shirts already clinging to their backs in the suffocating heat. Some carried flashlights though the sun was high, others held walking sticks, their knuckles pale with tension. Marissa's father was among them, jaw clenched, eyes burning with sleepless determination. "She's out here," he said to no one in particular, his voice low and raw. "She didn't leave, she's here." The searchers spread out, calling her name into the suffocating green. Their voices echoed strangely, bouncing between the trunks, dissolving into the underbrush. The forest responded only with the crackle of insects and the shrill cry of distant birds. Dogs circled and pulled, noses pressed to the dirt. For a brief, shattering moment, one animal stiffened, whining as though catching a trace. Hearts surged with hope, but it was false. The dog led them only to a patch of disturbed soil, likely where a deer had bedded down. Hours passed. Sweat-stung eyes, mosquitoes gnawed at bare skin. The deeper they pressed, the darker the woods grew, branches knitting together to block out the sun. The air cooled, damp, thick with the smell of earth and rotting leaves. The longer they searched, the more the place seemed to change. Not just a forest, but a presence. One volunteer muttered, "Feels like it's watching us." His voice was meant to be quiet, but it traveled, planting unease in the group. Small clues raised and fell like false heartbeats. A flash of red in the dirt, just a bottle cap. A footprint in the mud, too large, belonging to a hiker. A torn strip of fabric snagged on a branch, but it was pale green, not the denim jacket Marissa had been wearing. Marissa's mother remained near the search base, her hands pressed together so tightly her knuckles whitened. She paced in small circles, whispering her daughter's name under her breath, as though prayer itself could pull her from the trees. When a deputy returned empty-handed, she broke. "She's in there," she sobbed, pointing toward the thick line of trees. "You're not looking hard enough. She's in there." But the search dragged on, with nothing to hold on to. By late afternoon the sun had grown cruel again, burning through the canopy in thin blades. Volunteers staggered back to base, faces drawn, throats hoarse from shouting. Some shook their heads silently, others avoided the family's eyes altogether. As night fell, the woods grew colder, their silence heavier. Flashlights bobbed like fireflies in the distance, cutting small paths through endless black. Every snapped twig jolted nerves. Every rustle of brush froze the air in their lungs. Then, just as the last team began to retreat, a group swore they heard something. A sound, faint and broken. A cry. A voice. They froze, hearts hammering, lights jerking through the darkness. "Marissa," one whispered into the trees. The forest answered with silence. And when the searchers rushed toward the sound, they found only emptiness. No footprints, no broken branches, no proof that anyone had been there at all. The woods had swallowed her whole. Hope is a fragile thing. It bends, it frays, and under the crushing weight of silence, it can vanish. But for Marissa's father, hope hardened into something else. Obsession. By the third week, volunteers dwindled. Posters curled at the edges, their staples rusting in the summer rain. The police presence shrank to a single patrol car parked at the edge of the woods, its officer disinterested, often seen smoking more than searching. Neighbors stopped bringing casseroles. Friends, once eager to help, began whispering about moving on. But her father would not. Every morning, before the sun scorched the grass dry, he laced his boots and pulled on the same sweat-stained jacket. A flashlight, a pocket knife, and a dog-eared map became his daily companions. He returned to the woods again and again, as though repetition might force the forest to surrender its secret. "Come with me," he begged his wife one morning, his eyes hollow from lack of sleep. She shook her head slowly, trembling. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't walk those trees and not find her." So he went alone. The woods were different when entered by one man. Without the safety of voices, without the bobbing flashlights of others, the silence deepened into something suffocating. Branches reached out like skeletal fingers. Each footstep cracked against the undergrowth with accusing loudness. The forest smelled of damp moss, iron-rich soil, and the faint sweetness of decay. He carried her name on his tongue like a weapon. "Marissa," his voice echoed, stretched thin between the trees. Sometimes he thought he heard an answer, a murmur, a breath, but it was only the wind threading through leaves. Still he pressed further. One evening, long after dusk, he stumbled across a clearing he hadn't seen before. The moonlight revealed remnants of a small campfire, ashes scattered, a few charred sticks poking from the dirt. He crouched low, heart racing. Could it be hers? He touched the soil. It was cold, days old, maybe longer. No footprints remained. But the discovery lit something inside him. Proof that someone had been there. Proof that maybe, just maybe, she had passed this way. He returned home breathless, telling his wife, "She was there, I know it," but his words only brought tears to her eyes. "You're chasing shadows," she said softly, voice breaking. The police dismissed it outright. "Plenty of drifters use those woods," the deputy explained. "Doesn't mean it was her." But her father couldn't let go. His obsession spread into every corner of his life. He taped copies of the map to the kitchen wall, marking areas he had searched with red ink, circling places still left unexplored. He skipped work, ignoring the calls of his employer. At night, he lay awake, listening for sounds outside, the crunch of leaves, the creak of branches, convinced she might somehow come walking back. Ellie once crept into the kitchen late and found him standing before the map, whispering, "I'll find you, baby," he said, into the silence. She never forgot the way his shoulders shook. Weeks bled into months. Autumn rolled over the town, and the trees shed their leaves in crackling carpets of red and gold. Still he searched, through rain, through frost, through nights when the air froze in his lungs. He cut paths into the brush, crawled through caves slick with moss, waded streams until his legs went numb. "Why do you keep going?" a neighbor asked once, trying to sound supportive but failing. "Because no one else will," he answered simply. And then, 2 years later, long after even his wife had stopped believing, fate delivered something that neither he nor anyone else expected. Deep in the woods, miles beyond the official search perimeter, a hiker stumbled across an object half buried in the dirt. Its strap was frayed, its casing scarred and caked with mud, initials faintly scratched into the plastic. It was a camera. When the police developed the film, what they saw pulled the entire case back into the light. The discovery came not with fanfare, but with a single startled breath. On a cool September afternoon, 2 years after Marissa had vanished, a hiker weaving his way through the thick undergrowth stumbled on something small, black, and half swallowed by the earth. At first, he thought it was a broken piece of plastic, just another fragment of trash lost to the forest. But when he knelt down and brushed away the dirt, he realized it was heavier, more deliberate. A camera. Its casing was battered, the surface scarred from seasons of rain and frost. A tattered strap clung to it by threads, and along one side, faint but unmistakable, were letters scratched into the plastic. Initials. MT. The hiker's heart pounded. He had seen the missing posters years earlier. Everyone in the county had. He turned the object over in his hands, imagining the weight of it belonging once to her. A chill crept up his spine, despite the warmth of the afternoon. He carried it down the trail like an artifact too fragile to touch. At the ranger station, when he handed it over, the room fell silent. Word spread quickly, and within hours, the Thompson family stood once again on the brink of hope and terror. Police sealed the camera in an evidence bag. The casing, though battered, had protected what mattered most, the film inside. Against all odds, the roll remained intact, the canister wedged deep within, preserved like a secret the forest had been unwilling to release, until now. The day it was developed, the station filled with a tense quiet. The technician's hands shook as he threaded the film. Hours passed like lifetimes, as images bloomed, grainy but clear. The first frames were innocent. Snapshots of the parade, children waving flags. A float plastered with paper stars, Marissa herself grinning at the edge of the frame, ribbons woven into her hair. She was there, alive, laughing, untouched by what was to come. But the photograph shifted. The next series showed woods. The same woods where the camera had been found. Branches hung heavy in the grainy light, shadows draped over the forest floor. In one, Marissa stood at the center, her smile gone, her body angled as though listening. In another, her eyes flicked toward something beyond the frame. Fear was written there, subtle at first, then stark. And then came the most haunting detail. In the background of several images, partially obscured by trees, stood a figure. Not close enough to identify, not clear enough to reveal, but present. Watch. Investigators leaned over the photographs, magnifying glass pressed against glossy prints. Could be anyone, one muttered. Could be nothing. But the Thompsons saw what they had always feared, proof that she hadn't left by choice. Proof that someone had been with her, guiding or dragging her into the trees. Her mother pressed trembling fingers against one image, tracing Marissa's face as tears slid down her cheeks. She was scared, she whispered. You can see it. Look at her eyes. Her father said nothing. He only stared at the final frames, his fists clenching tighter with each passing second. The last photo was the most disturbing. It showed nothing but Marissa's face, close and blurred, as though she had tried to snap the picture herself in a rush. Her eyes were wide, her lips parted as if mid-breath. And across the frame, just over her shoulder, fell a long shadow, human, unmistakable. The technician laid the prints in a row on the table, the silence so thick it seemed to hum. The family knew, in that moment, that they were no longer chasing theories. The forest had finally given something back. But what it revealed was darker than anyone had imagined. The photographs lay on the table like fragments of a nightmare, each one a frozen heartbeat, a clue that refused to speak plainly. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead, casting a pale, sterile glow on the glossy images spread across the metal surface. Officers leaned in with furrowed brows, magnifying glasses hovering, while the Thompsons stood on the opposite side, hesitant, trembling, as though crossing the room to look closer might unravel them completely. The first frames seemed almost cruel in their innocence. Marissa, grinning beneath the July sun, her hair braided with ribbons, children clutching balloons, floats rolling past with music still lingering in the air. Her disposable camera had captured the brightness of that day, the ordinariness of what should have been a memory instead of an epitaph. But as the sequence advanced, the tone shifted. One photograph showed the tree line just beyond town, the colors muted, the light dimmer. Another caught Marissa, walking into the woods, her expression unreadable. Was it curiosity or fear? Her denim jacket looked stiff against her shoulders, her hands partially hidden in the frame. "Why would she go there?" whispered her mother, clutching the back of a chair to steady herself. "Why would she leave the parade?" No one had an answer. The next images offered no comfort. The forest closed in, each frame darker than the last, branches curled like claws. The ground was littered with leaves that seemed to muffle even the idea of escape. Marissa appeared in several shots, her face angled away, her eyes darting to something just beyond the lens. It was in those backgrounds that the figure appeared. At first, nothing more than a blur, an arrangement of shadows that could be mistaken for trees, but in the next frame, the shape was clearer. Shoulders, a head, the faint outline of a person standing still, half hidden, watching. The officer studying the photo cleared his throat. "Could be a trick of the light," he said too quickly. Her father slammed his palm against the table. "That's a man. Don't tell me that's nothing." Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Frame by frame, the story unfolded. Marissa glancing back, the figure closer, still indistinct, but undeniable now. In one shot, she appeared mid-step, her mouth slightly open as though she had called out or cried out. The trees blurred around her, movement captured in the grain. Then came the last photographs. One was taken at an odd angle, tilted, half obscured by Marissa's hand, as though she had been fumbling with the camera in haste. Her eye filled most of the frame, wide and glassy with fear. The other eye was cut off by the edge. Behind her cheek, barely visible, stretched a dark smear of shadow, and then the final shot. Marissa's face, close and blurred, her features distorted by proximity. She was no longer smiling. Her eyes stared directly into the lens, wide, pleading, almost as if she had intended this photo to be a message, a warning. Across her shoulder fell the long shape of something unmistakably human, a silhouette cast across her skin. Her mother broke then, turning away, a hand pressed hard against her mouth. Her father did not move. He stood like stone, eyes locked on the photograph, as though willing it to give more, to confess its truth. The technicians said little. They catalogued, they labeled, but their eyes betrayed unease. Because these were not random snapshots, they were a progression. A story unfolding, moment by moment, captured in grainy permanence. The camera had not lied. Somewhere in those woods, someone had been with Marissa. Someone close enough to cast a shadow, close enough to be caught forever in her final frames. And yet, for all the terror the photos revealed, they offered no answers. No face, no identity, only the frozen certainty that she had not been alone. Her family left the station that night with the prints clutched in a folder, each image both salvation and curse. Proof that she had not simply run away. Proof that the truth was far darker. But if the photos were a message, then the forest still held the rest of the story. The photographs ignited the town like a match to dry tinder. For 2 years, the silence of Marissa's disappearance had left nothing but whispers and weary resignation. Now, with the discovery of her camera, speculation surged through the community in waves of fear and suspicion. The police, once so certain she had simply run away, were forced to reconsider. Press conferences were held in cramped rooms. The photographs displayed on boards with long metal pointers indicating the shadowy figure. "We are pursuing multiple leads," the sheriff stated, his voice stiff, his uniform collar too tight. But behind the podium, his eyes betrayed unease, because the photographs didn't just prove Marissa hadn't run away, they suggested she had been followed. And so the theories began. Some pointed to the drifter who had been seen in town that summer, a man with a scraggly beard and wild eyes who slept near the railway tracks. Others whispered about the carnival worker who had disappeared the very next day, vanishing with the traveling fare that had rolled out at dawn. Neighbors remembered his stare, the way he lingered too long near the parade route. Then there was the ex-boyfriend, a boy barely older than Marissa, who had broken up with her only weeks before. He was angry, one classmate said. He said she embarrassed him. When questioned, he stammered, denied, then grew defensive, his alibi full of holes. But each lead, when tugged, unraveled into nothing. The drifter was long gone, his trail cold. The carnival worker surfaced months later in another state, guilty of theft but not of murder. The ex-boyfriend's story, though shaky, eventually aligned with witness accounts, placing him elsewhere. Still, the suspicion poisoned everything. Families began locking doors earlier. Children no longer played outside past dusk. The woods became a place of fear, where people swore they heard voices after dark or glimpsed shadows slipping between the trees. Inside the Thompson home, the photographs hung over every conversation. Spread across the dining room table, they were studied until the prints wore thin. Marissa's mother traced her daughter's face with her finger, whispering prayers under her breath. Her father stared instead at the background, searching for patterns in the blur of leaves and shadows. "There's something there," he muttered late one night, his voice gravel. "Not just the figure, something else. Look closer." And he was right. One officer reviewing the images noticed a detail almost overlooked. In one photograph, near the bottom edge, a pair of boots appeared. Not Marissa's. These were larger, darker, the kind worn by men. The shadowy figure was no trick of light. Whoever stood there was close enough to be nearly inside the frame. This revelation deepened the fracture in the investigation. If the person was so near, why hadn't anyone seen them? Why had no witness come forward in 2 years? Was it possible the figure wasn't a stranger at all, but someone known, someone who belonged enough in the community to pass unnoticed? Rumors turned inward. Suspicion crept toward neighbors, co-workers, even relatives. At grocery stores and church pews, glances sharpened, trust withered. Every man who wore boots, every man who had walked those woods, became a shadow in someone's eyes. And in that darkness, a chilling thought began to spread. What if the figure in the photographs wasn't an outsider? What if it was someone much closer, someone no one wanted to believe capable of such a thing? By the time autumn bled into winter, the photographs were no longer just evidence. They had become a mirror in which the town saw itself reflected in suspicion. Every blurred shadow, every indistinct bootprint, had seeded a question that refused to die. Was the person who took Marissa hidden among us all along? Detectives began combing through lives they had once dismissed. The investigation pushed into living rooms, kitchens, and backyards, peeling away the polite veneer of small-town familiarity. Doors opened reluctantly, eyes flicked nervously. People who had once gathered in solidarity after the parade tragedy now eyed each other with quiet dread. The police focused first on neighbors closest to the Thompson family. The man across the street, a retired mechanic, admitted he often walked the woods at night. "It calms me," he said, his voice defensive. His boots matched the kind seen in the photo, but his alibi, spending the evening with his daughter, held. Still, the whisper followed him through town. What if he slipped away for just a while? Others weren't so easily cleared. A teacher at Marissa's school had been rumored to give her special attention. When detectives pressed him, his answers wavered, his eyes darting. "She was a good student," he stammered. His apartment, searched weeks later, revealed nothing incriminating, only the stale odor of loneliness. Even the Thompsons weren't immune to speculation. One officer dared to ask Marissa's mother if there had been trouble at home. "Teenagers run when they're scared," he suggested coldly. She slapped her hand against the table, eyes blazing. "She wasn't scared of us. She was scared of someone else." But the most unsettling discoveries came from the community itself. Behind the perfect lawns and Sunday church smiles, investigators uncovered grudges and secrets. A neighbor owed thousands in gambling debt. Another had been quietly fired for theft. One woman confessed she had seen a man slipping into the woods during the parade, but she hadn't spoken up then for fear of drawing attention to herself. "Describe him," the detective urged. She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "I didn't look long enough. I didn't want to look." Each secret pulled the town tighter into paranoia. Friends avoided each other. Old alliances dissolved. The search for Marissa became a search for guilt, and the line between the two blurred. And then, a breakthrough. A detective reviewing the photographs under specialized light noticed a detail nearly invisible before: a patch on the jacket of the shadowy figure. Blurred, faint, but present. A stitched emblem. Crossed axes inside a circle. The symbol matched one worn by a local logging crew, men who spent their lives cutting deep into the same woods where Marissa disappeared. The logging company records narrowed the pool. Only a handful of men had been working that sector during the summer of her disappearance. Interviews followed. The detectives pressing harder now, no longer sifting through vague possibilities, but staring directly at names, faces, alibis. One man grew visibly tense when shown the photograph. His hands shook. His story faltered. He insisted he had been nowhere near the parade that day, but others contradicted him. A shopkeeper remembered him buying beer that morning, only blocks from where Marissa was last seen. When asked about the boots, he muttered something about them being standard issue. When asked about the patch on the jacket, his lips tightened. The town waited, bracing itself. Because if this man was the figure in the photographs, if he had followed Marissa into the woods, then the nightmare was not an outsider's crime, it was homegrown. And as suspicion narrowed onto him, the community realized the truth they had been resisting for years. The shadow in those photographs wasn't a stranger passing through. It was someone who had always been here. The interrogation room was small, painted the color of damp concrete, with a single buzzing light above that hummed like a trapped insect. Across the metal table sat the man whose jacket patch matched the faint emblem in the photographs, a logger with calloused hands and a face carved by long hours in the sun. For weeks, he had insisted he knew nothing, had seen nothing. But now, under the glare of two detectives and the weight of the evidence folder between them, his composure began to splinter. "Why don't you start by telling us where you really were that day?" Detective Harmon asked, voice steady, eyes sharp. The man shifted in his chair, boots scraping the floor. "Told you already," he muttered. "At home. Didn't leave." Harmon slid a photograph across the table. Marissa's blurred face. The shadow across her shoulder. Then explain this. For the first time the logger looked down, his jaw tightening. His hand twitched as if he might push the photo away, but he didn't. He stared at it, eyes flicking over the grainy silhouette, then closed them as though bracing against a blow. "You can't prove that's me," he said finally, voice low. "Maybe not yet," Harmon replied. "But others saw you near the parade. You bought beer at Rick's Market that morning. You walk those woods every week. And now we've got a jacket patch and boots that don't lie." Silence stretched. The man's breathing quickened. His palms grew damp, leaving faint marks on the table's surface. Finally, he spoke, but not what they expected. "I saw her," he whispered. The room stilled. Detective Harmon leaned forward. "You saw Marissa?" The logger nodded slowly, his eyes darting toward the mirror that reflected the room back at him. "She wasn't alone." The words dropped like stones into water, sending ripples through every person listening behind the glass. "Who was she with?" Harmon pressed. The man swallowed hard. "A guy, taller than me, wore a cap. They were headed into the woods." She looked uneasy. "I thought maybe it was none of my business." His voice cracked. "God help me, I thought it was none of my business." "Why didn't you come forward?" The logger's face twisted, guilt crawling across it. "Because I knew. how it would look. Everyone knows my record. Fights, drinking, I didn't want them pointing at me. Harmon's eyes narrowed. So, you let the whole town think she ran away. You let her parents suffer for 2 years. The logger slammed his fist onto the table, tears springing to his eyes. I didn't take her, I swear on my life. But I saw something that day I'll never forget. He described it then, the way Marissa glanced back at him, fear flickering in her eyes, as if silently pleading. The man beside her had gripped her arm too tightly. The logger hesitated, frozen between stepping forward and walking away. He chose wrong. But if that's true, Harmon asked, his voice quiet now, why didn't you say it was someone else when the photographs came out? The logger's gaze fell to the table. Because the man she was with, I knew him. The room went cold. He gave a name that shook the investigators, a name tied not to an outsider, but to someone inside the community, someone respectable, trusted. Behind the glass, one officer muttered, "No, that can't be." But the details lined up, the boots, the access to the woods, the timing. The interrogation ended not with handcuffs, but with a confession that was not a confession, an accusation instead, a shifting of blame. A new trail in the dark.
Outside, the Thompsons were told only fragments. The logger had admitted seeing Marissa. He had admitted staying silent, but the full truth, the name whispered in that room, was held back, guarded, until investigators could decide whether it was revelation or manipulation. For the family, it felt like a cruel twist. 2 years of silence, and now only more shadows. But one thing was clear. The case had cracked open, and whatever spilled out next would not be simple. When the name was spoken in that interrogation room, it echoed like thunder through the small department halls. A man everyone knew, a man no one wanted to believe capable of evil. Detectives moved quickly but quietly, their voices lowered as though the walls themselves might carry whispers to the wrong ears. They pulled records, traced timelines, cross-checked phone logs and work hours, and slowly, the cracks began to show. This man, once a trusted figure in the town, had been unaccounted for during the critical window of the parade's end. His alibi, once airtight, crumbled under scrutiny. He had claimed to be with relatives, but they now hesitated, stumbled, admitted he had left for a stretch of hours no one could explain. His boots, when investigators finally laid eyes on them, bore the same thick soles visible in Marissa's photographs. His jacket, worn, faded, still wore the emblem of crossed axes stitched faintly into the sleeve. When confronted, his face hardened into something cold. "I had nothing to do with her," he said, voice clipped, but the denial was too quick, too practiced. The Thompsons were told carefully, as though words alone might break them. They sat in a small room at the station, a folder unopened on the table. Her mother gripped her husband's hand until her knuckles blanched. "Who?" she asked, her voice thin. The detective hesitated, then gave the name. The silence that followed was not shock alone, it was betrayal, because this was someone who had stood on their porch after the disappearance, who had handed out flyers, who had bowed his head in prayer with the community. Marissa's father surged to his feet, eyes blazing. "I knew it wasn't strangers," he spat. "I knew it was here, in our town." The unthinkable truth was no longer hidden in shadows. Piece by piece, investigators reconstructed what they believed happened. Witnesses now recalled fleeting details, the suspect leaving the parade early, seen lingering near the edge of the woods. The logger's testimony, the figure gripping Marissa's arm, aligned too closely to dismiss, and the photographs, frozen in grainy permanence, placed him behind her, step for step. Her final hours unfolded like shards of glass. She had left the safety of the crowd, perhaps lured, perhaps coerced. She had walked into the trees, her disposable camera still in her hand, still trying to capture pieces of her world. Each snap of the shutter was a desperate record, the trail, the trees, the figure closing in. And then, those final blurred images of her face, her fear, her plea. Somewhere in those woods, investigators believed she had fought. Somewhere in the silence, the struggle had ended. The truth, however, was incomplete, because no body was ever found, no grave disturbed, no remains uncovered.
The forest, wide and endless, still refused to yield. For the Thompsons, that absence was both torment and tether. Her mother clung to hope that maybe somehow Marissa had survived, had escaped, was hiding somewhere unseen. Her father, by contrast, carried rage, demanding the woods be torn apart until nothing remained unexplored. The suspect maintained his denial, cold and unflinching. "You have no proof," he hissed in one interrogation. And in a way, he was right. No physical evidence tied him to Marissa's disappearance. Only shadows, whispers, contradictions, and those haunting photographs. But to the family, the truth was already carved into stone. The betrayal cut deeper than the mystery. To know that the man who smiled at them, who shook their hands and bowed his head in prayer, might have been the same man whose shadow fell across their daughter's face. It was a wound no justice could heal. And yet, even with the truth closing in, one question remained like a specter. If he had taken her into the woods, where was she now? The revelation should have brought closure. Instead, it fractured the town in ways no one could have imagined. The accused man's name spread in hushed tones across church pews, grocery aisles, and bar stools. Some shook their heads in denial, refusing to believe he could be capable of such darkness. Others avoided eye contact, knowing the evidence pointed too sharply to ignore. For the Thompsons, it was neither shock nor surprise. It was confirmation. The betrayal, though, was unbearable. "He ate at our table," Marissa's mother whispered one night, sitting at the kitchen counter where the clock ticked too loudly. "He prayed with us, and all the while, he knew." Her words drifted into silence. Unfinished, because finishing them would make the horror complete. The trial never came. No body, no definitive evidence. Only shadows and photographs, testimony and suspicion. Without the final piece, the law stood paralyzed. The man walked free, his reputation poisoned, his life shrunken, but technically unbroken. He left town months later, a ghost of himself, carrying with him the silence of unanswered questions. The Thompsons were left with less than justice and far more than grief. They held a memorial service in the fall, 2 years and 3 months after Marissa's disappearance. The church was packed, the air thick with candle smoke and unspoken guilt. Photographs of her smiling in school plays, blowing out birthday candles, posing with her sister lined the altar. Ellie clutched her mother's hand, eyes fixed on the largest photograph of all, Marissa in her denim jacket, hair tied with ribbons, alive in a way the room could no longer bear. Her father stood before the crowd, his voice trembling but firm. "She didn't run away. She didn't leave us by choice. Someone took her, and we will never stop remembering that truth." His words echoed against the stained glass windows, heavy and final. Afterward, neighbors approached with tearful embraces. Apologies whispered, too late. But the family knew apologies couldn't fill the void. The space at the dinner table remained empty. The sound of Ellie's laughter carried a hollow edge, as though missing its echo. Nights were long, haunted by dreams of a daughter walking back through the door, smiling as though nothing had ever happened. The photographs remained, locked in a wooden box on the mantel. Sometimes Marissa's mother opened it, fingers trembling as she lifted each glossy print. She studied them not for answers anymore, but for fragments of her daughter's presence. The tilt of her head, the braid of her hair, the fleeting joy in her smile before it was stolen. The final photograph, the one with her face close, eyes wide, shadow falling, was the one her father could not look at. He turned it face down whenever it appeared, as though refusing to let the last memory be fear. "That's not who she was," he muttered. "That's not how she should be remembered." But it was how the world remembered her. The town changed, too. The woods that once offered children places to play now loomed as a place no one dared enter. The annual 4th of July parade was canceled the next year, the absence more telling than any speech. What should have been a tradition of celebration had become a reminder of loss, of how quickly joy could turn into horror. Years later, the mystery still lingered, unanswered and unbearable. New families moved in, new children were born, but the story of the girl who vanished remained carved into the town's identity. Locals whispered it to warn their kids, to remind them not to stray too far, not to trust too easily. For the Thompsons, there was no moving on, only moving forward, carrying her with them. Ellie grew older, her sister's absence shaping her in ways she could never fully name. She spoke of Marissa often, her memories half her own and half borrowed from stories her parents repeated. "She's still here," she once told her mother softly, "just not the way we want." And maybe she was right. Because every time the family passed the forest edge, every time a shadow stretched long across the ground, every time they touched the worn edges of those photographs, Marissa was there. Her smile, her fear, her presence frozen forever on a roll of film that should never have survived, yet did. A camera that emerged from the dirt like an unholy witness, forcing the truth into light but leaving justice buried. The woods had taken her. The camera had given her back. And the rest, the why, the how, the final moments, remained sealed in silence.